half hour mark, we're getting a lot more people coming
Maybe,
in
maybe
after
people
that
switch
one.
rooms.
We don't allow people to come in midstream.
So you stop them? Like you
Yeah,
just sit
we
there,
will
you're on your
physically-
phone
We will
gatekeeping?
physically stop them,
Okay.
because if you're not willing to commit, we don't want you in
Oh,
this.
yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So we can,
Yeah, I think it's room fly.
we're at 29, so I'll wait a full minute before we.
Can
start,
I
if that
indulge in,
works.
since there's so few, can people like tell me what institutions they're from and if they have this current setup or they're thinking about it or what? Can I take over moderation of the panel so far?
Thanks, yeah, Ruth, I'm a librarian at Binghamton University. We have a domain in one zone. A lot of people just use it for WordPress. So if we had a WordPress system, we'd probably not use domain in one. So we're kind of in that, because we like having the extra 2%.
Yes. Great.
Zach?
Zach Whalen, University of Mary Washington. We have a domain awareness system, a sites and DoOO system as well as two complementary systems that I'm continuing to explore use cases for each of those systems, but I've been an early adopter of domains and everything for a long time.
So I'm Andy Rush from the University of North Florida. Used to work at the University of Mary Washington, and I exported the idea of domain one zone to UNF. And it's faculty domain, so it's faculty only. So what we're exploring is, okay, let's bring the students into this and a WordPress multi-site so that they can just do the kind of quick sign up and do the thing that they need as opposed to giving them the spaces, but then also optioning them if they want to have spaces to do more than just WordPress. So that's kind of where we are right now, and we're figuring out the financing.
I'm Mo Pelsel. I'm from Grinnell College. Been there since 2017 and admin for our domains. We have, in addition to the regular platform, we have several users on cloud, but we do not have WordPress Multisite. We thought we might have a use case for it this spring because a decision was made for all the student orgs on campus to have new provisioning for web hosting and digital publishing. So we've had a few orgs sign up, but we decided to go ahead and create domain accounts for each of them rather than try to create a WordPress multi-site. So we have domains in cloud. We don't have a site. We've had a pretty broad range of users, faculty, students, quite a few campus units and offices want additional space beyond what they could do on the main college websites. We have a lot of that and faculty research projects.
From Lansing Community College, we do have domains of one's own programs. I'm not sure, what else were we responding to?
Yeah, just basically what setup are you having, or are there conversations potentially at your institution, which is why you're maybe here?
Yeah, so our situation is a little bit interesting. This is also my colleague who may say more about it as well, but
All right, fair.
So we have domains of one's own program. A lot of folks know Jim Look, who's at LCC and kind of got it started. So now we've kind of inherited the program. It's part of our Center for Teaching Excellence, and the official position we have to support the program is Amanda's. So we are, and I help to support it as well because I had to learn a few of the things. But yeah, we're still pretty green to all of it.
Yeah, so my name is Amanda Sasio, and I'm the Open Learning Specialist, and that position was created back in December. The only reason why I didn't want to talk more about it is because I am very new to WordPress and just all of everything and everything, so I also just wanted to go to the session just to learn a lot more and just to see what everyone else is doing, things like that.
All right, and I have similar pattern of questions for you three, so they can know a little bit about, maybe a little more granular, and let them know a bit of like your stats. Like you got both things, so everyone up here has both domain in one's own and WordPress multi-site. Let them know a little bit about when you started each, and maybe some aspects of scale, if you know those sorts of things offhand.
Do you want me to start? Yeah,
Please.
yeah. I guess since kind of origin story kind of happens at Mary Washington. So UMW Blogs, which is what WordPress Multisite, started here in 2007, and that was, right, there was no domain of one's own. It did not exist. And so Mary Washington really experimented in that space first, and UMW Blog still exists. We're in the process of retiring it. Domain of one's own, right? We have that, comes online, and actually pushes out UMW Blogs in a lot of ways. There's a big push to get everybody off of UMW Blogs. Let's get them on domain of one's own. So that kind of happened until about 2019. A lot of staff changes, kind of pushed, lots of things different ways. And then there's the pandemic. Everybody quit using domain of one's own and UMW Blogs entirely. It felt like people felt there was too much to deal with anyway. And so we come back around to, okay, what do we do about UMW Blogs, right? What if we're 29? That's how old in internet time? It's very old. It had a lot of legacy issues going on, right? Because it was designed, there was no domain of one's own, so you had to do really, if you were trying to experiment, you had to add all sorts of plugins. They did lots of things to make things happen. So where we are now is we just spun up a new instance of a WordPress multi-site. We call it Sites at UMW, as Zach mentioned. And we put it kind of side by side now as that kind of entry level space that we're hoping people will adopt. And I'll say, so scale wise, UMW Blogs right now is like over 11,000 sites. I don't know how many users. Sites at UMW, very small right now because it just started, but we had a similar amount of signups, which was kind of interesting, between Sites at UMW and domain of one's own in the spring. Spring is a little bit lighter usually for domains, but 1,400 users in domain of one's own here, and we're a school about 4,000, maybe a little bit less than that. And sites is, I don't know, the data is not great on that right now because it's so small, but that's
What about, do you remember the old UMW blog?
Yeah, I know, it's just like the numbers, it's, yeah.
So stupid.
It's very large.
Yeah.
Considering, I mean, obviously, there are schools that are much bigger that have lots more than that, but for the size of our school, there's, right, when you're doing something for that long, it gets large.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm Skallerup Bessette. I'm the Assistant Director for Digital Learning at Georgetown University. Do you want to see your title?
Yeah, right, I didn't even mention that,
and
right?
maybe your name, I don't know.
Yeah, all right, yeah, so I'm Shannon Hauser. I'm the Associate Director of the Digital Knowledge Center, but I basically am the sysadmin for both domain of one's own and Sites at UMW. So.
Yeah. Among my many, many responsibilities at the Center for New Designs in Learning and Scholarship at Georgetown, also known as CANDLES, which is both our teaching and learning center, as well as our e-learning center, as well as our academic technology / center. So we're an all-in-one. CANDLES has been in existence for about 20 years as it's currently done. We were ahead of the game when we brought together e-learning or online learning and academic technology and a traditional teaching and learning center. Randy Bass, I don't know if people know or heard of Randy Bass, yes, he was the original head of CANDLES, the first head of CANDLES, and followed what Jim was doing down here at UMW very closely. And so we followed very closely behind UMWs. We were one of the first schools to also install a WordPress multi-site after UMW did so. We were also one of the first schools to embrace domain of one's own after UMW introduced it. Say what you will about what that means. I was not there for any of that. I was, prior to Georgetown, I was actually here at UMW at DTLT. I've been at Georgetown now for about 5 years. I'm coming up on 5 years. Yeah, I know, right? It's still weird. So fun fact, we are, again, just behind where, where UMW is, again, where we have had a long-standing, we call it the Commons blog. So that is our WordPress multi-site. It hasn't been updated in years. We're still running an outdated version of PHP. We're running outdated versions of WordPress. It is broken. And so we are, again, just a little behind you guys, where we are rebuilding our GU Commons blog, and we're calling it Course Sites. But as of right now, because I had to get all of these statistics, we have over 34,000 users on the Commons blog. Did anyone apparently? Again, before my have domains where we have a little over 3,000. And we're a fairly large school, so that's a fairly small number. And if you actually look at right now, the Commons blog, we have a lot of power users, because a lot of them move to domains and that. So we have a lot of power users who are using it as a course blog, students for blogging, and starting to use them as e-portfolios as well. We have a really interesting and unique setup, or particular, yeah, I know, it's weird. We have a unique setup, which is the exact opposite of what everybody else is doing, where you have to ask permission to get I keep saying UNW, to get a Commons blog, but anyone can sign up for a domain. Sure, why not? This is something we are going to be talking about as we're moving forward, rethinking sustainability, rethinking all of these things. But we do, one of the most popular features of our Commons blog, which would seem counterintuitive, but I just did a faculty panel at our big faculty development event, and they all sang its praises, is we have a plugin that was designed for us, or was of making a hub and spoke model. And so we have a plugin that automatically does that. We give it a slug, we input the administrator, who is typically the faculty member's name, and then we put in the net IDs of all of the students in the class. And it automatically creates a hub and spoke model, where every student gets their own spoke on the hub. But the hub itself is closed. And so students are an administrator on their own site and a viewer on everybody else's site, right? And so what this creates is this more closed community, and it's been particularly popular in the freshman writing courses, where the students feel a lot more secure and comfortable sharing just among their peers and knowing that it's not out on the open web. There's always an option after the fact that they can switch the permissions. They have that full control, but by default, it's private, which is, again, a kind of unique feature that I asked on the Discord, and I'm like, does anybody else do this? And everybody's like, you're a weirdo. And I'm like, yeah, I know. So we really like the kind of targeted use of the WordPress multi-site, right? People use it as a blog. They don't even care that all of our themes are outdated right now. Whereas domains, being a large R1 institution, it's a lot more about research. In a lot of cases, we have a lot of outward-facing projects, tons of Omeka sites. If you go to the Georgetown Slavery Archive, it has an edu address, but it uses Omeka on the domain of one's own, on reclaimed servers. So we do a lot of work around, particularly around research. We collaborate with our digital librarians. The expertise around Omeka actually lives in the library. So we do a lot of collaborations with them around hosting podcasts, building websites, around the research. But they're also being used as a teaching tool in that sense. So that's basically the history of what we're doing.
Okay, hey, that's very helpful. It's easy to go last because then I can try to fill in blanks, hopefully to make it a different variation on a similar theme. So my name is Ben Harwood. I'm an instructional designer, learning experience designer, instructional technologist, faculty, student, staff advocate, whatever you want to call me. I'm trying to be
all
helpful.
the things.
The glue that kind of somehow sticks somewhere, we hope, in the library and rubs off on people in positive ways. So I work at Skidmore College, which is located far upstate New York. I'll give more of a kind of I think an institutional history of web hosting very quickly at my institution, and hopefully explain how we got from where we had servers in the library garages, right, self-hosted, and now they're running somewhere in Reclaim's space. And we're very happy with them being there. So when I got to Skidmore in 2007, our college, we've got 2,400 students, so pretty small. Res Ed, liberal arts, not a grad school. There was a distance learning program called the University Without Walls, which was probably a digital upgrade from what we used to call correspondence courses, which maybe you may have taken in the past. I did one time. Everything by paper sent back and forth. And there was a blogging platform by the name of Movable Type. And their licensing so we were creating all these things manually, all the accounts, all the associations. And then That program software got very expensive and no longer warranted the cost for the small amount of courses. And eventually that University Without Walls program was phased out. So we had to find a way, though, we wanted to preserve the course content and also other research that had been on there for blogs. So it seemed we moved to WordPress. So there was a kind of a conversion migration of stuff over into WordPress, which was a nightmare and kept me busy for a while. So we moved to WordPress probably in 2008 or 9. And immediately we had WordPress Multisite, and we called it Skidmore Blogs. It still has goes by that name to this day. Yeah, so one of the neat things about our community, WordPress, has from really the start, we've tried to really emphasize the word community. In fact, I no longer call it Skidmore Blogs, I call it Skidmore's Community WordPress, in contrast to domain in one's own, and I'll get to that a little bit later. So in a way, we've had this niche community where people would come to me and say, I don't want to use the learning management system. I understand it, it works great. And we've been through iterations of WebCT, Blackboard, now we're using Desire to Learn. And there's a really important place for those tools because it's nice to offer our community options. So you can use the LMS or you can use WordPress to make a course website. So we have, and people gravitate to that. Faculty like to use it, those who use it, because they can customize it and it gets them outside of the cookie cutter type of experience from these tools that are really meant to scale massively, are they not? So the community member will come and say, hey, I really like this theme, can we get it? And then I would evaluate it and try to determine if it was something worth, we have a production and test instance, right? So trying to do things somewhat methodically and correctly. So I would test these things out on our cloned instance of production WordPress Multisite, and then figure out, is it something that's sustainable? Is it being updated? Going on WordPress.org and seeing if it's being actively maintained. Is it a free theme? Is it a freemium? All those things. And so if it's well vetted, then we could install it. And so one person could use it, then the whole community could use it. This is especially valuable for licensed themes. So if you, rather than having somebody go out and buy a separate license for a theme, 3 or 4 times over, we install it once, and ideally you can also have other community members benefit from it. So themes, control the appearance of the website. Same is true of plugins. I think on our WordPress multi-site, there are probably way too many themes. Talk about needing to update them. There's probably about 57 or 58. And a summer project usually is to go back through and make sure that those are all updated. And they do have an auto updates feature, and I haven't been burned yet by not disabling auto updates on those things. But, not yet, right? But the licensed themes work well. So yeah, it's a really lots of we as DS 106 people used to say, we're open for business. We try to turn no one away, but within reason. Student clubs come to us. They'd like a website. Our radio station, WSPN, runs on our WordPress, and they've got their streaming show. We have lots of clubs. The only time we'll say no is one time I had a business class come in and they were doing something with e-commerce and started selling things on it, and I said, no, because that would really jeopardize your not-for-profit status, which I didn't do. So I had to shut those guys down, but they were understandable. It was a short-term contract anyway. And then, students wanting to use sites, create a web presence. Increasingly, faculty are having them create podcasts or create videos, or what I like to call video essays, right, as a way to redesign. Maybe you've got 5 writing assignments, and let's do a video essay instead and try to augment and see what happens with that. We do have there's this, I don't know if it's called the privacy plugin, but so when a site is first created, we don't have a self-service turnkey thing, right? Like you have to come to us first because people don't necessarily know what they want. Do they want a community WordPress site or blog, or do they want a domain of one's own? And rather than just letting people turn on and activate these sites and have a bunch of empty hello worlds, they come to us first and they request a site, we create it, and then the community privacy thing lets them have it be public search indexable or normal public out there. And then behind a login, you get the community aspect, so a site can be available just to the community, or in the case of faculty teaching courses, similar to our learning management system, you can have it be registered users only, or entirely private. So that kind of flexibility on, adapting it to your intended audience is something you can't do in Brightspace in your LMS. At least we don't have ours set up that way. We still have, how many users? So there's probably 6,000 users in there, and I'll tell you why I keep them in there, because there are still students, normally after 2 years, I will remove old sites, but honestly, a lot of times, if they're public facing, I'll make them private, and eventually, 2 to 3 years out, I'll delete them, but I don't take the users out. Sometimes students, they continue to interact with their site even after graduation. And one of the flexibilities there was you could modify a user account that was created with our login, and you could change the password. But unfortunately, that has changed because we needed to tighten down security. So even generating, so for example, let's say a student graduates and then they're still part of an internship program, like our Career Development Center has a really active blog. And they go out and do internships after they graduate, but they'd still like to be able to post content, but their login no longer works for email, right, in those systems. But we could still figure out a way to keep access without having to change their password, but now we do. So there's probably 6,000 users in there, and periodically we'll clean them up. Websites, gosh, off the top of my head, in our WordPress multi-site, there's probably 1,200 sites in there. So that's been really successful. It's been really great. It is used for many different purposes, and even for the administration uses it as well to control access for private content within offices. They'll use it. So we went from hosting the servers on campus. I can't remember which year it was, but we decided it was just. This coincided also, I think it's important, this historic moment. So like you saw at the art exhibit downstairs, the computer there running Netscape, there was, I think UMW offered faculty or employee web spaces. So we used to offer, a lot of universities did this too, each employee could have their own personal web space, right? And we called those the tilde sites. So it was www.skidmore.edu/tilde and then the username, right? So at some point, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, an IT security audit came up and they said, you really shouldn't be offering these like web spaces because some of those were Apache LAMP enabled. And so you'd have, people writing scripts and then forgetting about them, and somehow they hadn't changed the permissions. And we never had any major event, but I mean, seriously, if you're getting an audit, that's going to raise a flag for all kinds of reasons. So we had to shut down those employee spaces, okay? So faculty, staff, and also, only faculty could have those, faculty and staff, not students. So we had to shut down the tilde spaces and then, to get them essentially off our network, to get them off of our servers. So that's when we moved our WordPress multi-site to Reclaim. So maybe that was like 5 or 6 years ago. And they've really done a great job hosting it. Some of those websites, they were still straight out HTML websites, the ones still with the funky little blinking GIFs. Those are always great treasures to come across. And we offered people the ability to preserve the HTML because you could run that over, especially on with those people who wanted to preserve their HTML websites or other, computer science faculty. We just shipped them right over to domains, right? Because they can have that autonomy of still being able to run that. And then faculty just wanted, web pages they built with Dreamweaver or something like that. We offered them a conversion path. You convert over to WordPress. And that was, we helped rebuild some of those and taught them how to do it. And then otherwise, we just migrated their sites, it was seamless. Nobody really knew. At that point, it's interesting, like we didn't talk about self-hosting versus cloud. I mean, we kind of forget that stuff's in the cloud now, right? It makes a lot more sense that way. And that went really well. So the domains is, let me see, we offer actually faculty, staff, and students can have their own domains. And I don't have the stats off the top of my head, but whatever packaging Reclaim approached this with, it made perfect sense. So we had pre-purchased so many, maybe it was 150, I can't remember how many cPanel accounts we have. Maybe it was 150, 300, I can't remember. But those are being used and increasingly adopted. I try to encourage students, especially when they want to build a professional web presence, to just start using domains, because then they don't have to sort through the migration. And I've only had a few requests where people have said, I really want to take that site off of, Skidmore Community WordPress and have it on my own. And it's possible to migrate it, but it's, there might be some tricks in there. So anyway, I'm just kind of trying to riff here off of the different themes that come up.
And I'll keep the questions tighter so that they'll feel a little bit more, contained, because this was kind of like, what's your origin story?
Yeah.
I guess there's no sound? What happened to the sound?
The sound's still going.
Oh.
As it should be for y'all.
Okay.
We're having trouble hearing the audience.
Okay.
When they ask questions, if you'll just restate the question.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I get notifications from Discord on my watch.
All right, we
that's
feel
all.
all right. We got a good background, an extensive background. So what did we learn? Stuff starts in a lot of different ways, has a tendency to spread out in different degrees of complexity. Here's a quick question for you. You just pick between two things. When these rebirth cycles happen, like sunsetting UMW blogs and starting a new thing, is this a natural disaster or seasonal? Just pick one.
Seasonal.
Seasonal, Lee?
If you're not paying attention to the seasons, it can turn into a natural disaster, which I'm currently experiencing. So,
Okay,
but
you
it should be seasonal, but
Okay.
if it isn't, then it becomes a natural disaster. It's like you forget winter happens, like up here in Virginia.
Okay.
Right? Oh wait, we get snow.
Ben, your thoughts?
If we have advance warning that there are tornadoes coming next week, generally, it's seasonal if we can plan ahead.
Yeah.
So
Otherwise,
not the end of the world to have to sunset something and start something new. Gives you some new opportunities and a way to kind of get rid of perhaps stuff that got really heavy. And think about that when you start your new thing, right?
Yes.
Lessons learned in the new world is a beautiful way to do this. So more maybe the Apple style of development rather than Windows, which is backwards compatibility to the beginning of time versus occasionally making people a little bit mad and
Well-
moving on with life. Or,
Well, and we also, some of that is dictated by the software though.
Right.
Right? Like, we're not going to get, our biggest challenge right now is we haven't updated PHP. And there's no backwards compatible secure PHP. So we have to move forward in that sort of sense. But also, the web, as we've been talking about, when UMW blog started, when Georgetown Commons started, when the Tilde site started, the web was a much different place. And so there is something to be said about taking this opportunity to revisit what do we want this to be? Even just calling it the Commons blog, right? Everybody now sort of rolls their eyes and be like, the Commons, like that isn't even a thing anymore, for better or worse. So again, it's not just it's taking a step back and saying, what are we trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish? How is that reflected in how we build it, what we name it? We talk about domain names and how important those are, but even the names of our programs. It's a chance to be able to look at that because, again, the web from 15 years ago is not the web that we're currently working on, and so it's essential to revisit and to rethink and refresh.
well, that's a beautiful transition to this question. All right, so you got your elevator pitch, right? You're trying to tell somebody as succinctly as possible.
And besides that second
how
one.
tall is this building?
Yeah.
The
How long's
difference,
the elevator ride?
it's one, if it's tall, it's a very fast elevator.
Oh, yeah, sure.
All right, so you got to tell them the difference between the domain of one's own option and your WordPress multi-site option. So high speed, give it to me, Shannon.
Yeah, this is something we think a lot about in marketing. So WordPress Multisite is the simple way to start building on the web. It's just like you can get right in there, start making your thing. We use the whole apartment and house analogy. It's like WordPress Multisite's like having an apartment. You could do things in there, but you don't own the infrastructure. You can, you can paint some of the walls, but you can't move the walls, right? People get upset about that if you do that in apartments. Domain of zones like a house. You got, you could do whatever renovation you want there. Do, model that how you want. You have a lot more control, but also that comes with, also responsibility, just like houses do.
Which is scary.
Yeah.
I try to frame it as a learning curve, right? And a kind of cost-benefit analysis. You can tell I work at Georgetown when I start talking about these sorts of things. But I say there's a really low barrier to entry for the Commons blog, right? Very low barrier to entry, very low learning curve, but highly limited in what you can do, right? Domains, higher learning curve, but way more flexibility, right? And so what are you looking for, maximum flexibility or maximum ease of use? And then, you know, if they're doing research projects, chances are it's a default all the way, you're already in domains, it's not even a question. But that is pretty much the going through faculty with the cost-benefit analysis.
I think it depends on the person asking. So a professor comes and says, I want to have a course site. Absolutely, WordPress Multisite. Why? Because we can get access to all the students very quickly, just enroll them. A student comes to us and says, I need a website. It's for a course, but it's only for me only. And I'd say, well, still, yeah, let's build it on the WordPress Multisite. Another student comes to me and says, you know, I'd really like to put my capstone project here and make a nice website. I'm graduating next year. So, well, have you thought about domains? When it's really all about that particular student, then I'm going to encourage them to build it on domains, because then we don't have to worry about them having, you know, to take it down later. They don't have to export it because they've already built it where they're going, away from campus.
Well, and to mix up the pattern here a little bit, let me follow up with you. What's the support structure look like between the two services? How does it differ for you? How do you convey those expectations to the people when you help them make this choice?
Yeah, so if it's, generally, it can be a little more high touch, more resource intensive for people using domains, because I have to sit down and explain to them how the cPanel works, right? And I take them through that installation, I mean, to the point where the installatron asks them to create an administrator username and password. It's like, no, that is not your university credential. In fact, I would probably create one of your own personal, and let's not use the university email address, use a personal email address, right? So we're setting this up. So there's a little bit more high touch. A lot of times they're asking just for WordPress, but I also introduce very quickly the cPanel, right? Because you've got a whole lot of things going on here. So that's a little bit more, it takes a little bit more time. I'm really lucky to have some generally, well, like Alex, some high performing student assistants. It's Alex Carney who came with me. And so I train them. It's a little bit train the trainer model that can work pretty well with good students. But certainly the community WordPress one's generally easier. I've got, you know, most times they are more workflow familiar requests, and I've got documentation I can send people to as well.
How about you, Lee?
For the past 6 months, it's been me, and only me. We've had staff turnover. I do have some GAs who help troubleshoot, but one of them was study abroad, another one graduated. So anyway, so for a while it was me. We do class visits. So we will go in and we will introduce, depending on what level it's at, particularly on the Commons blog. Most of the Commons blog users are power users, so they've been using it for years and years and years. And they're familiar enough with it, but still want somebody to kind of come in and talk about it. We're going to have to revisit that model as we upgrade to Gutenberg, because nobody will know what they're doing in it. We do have that process that you talk about around cPanel. We actually have some video and some documentation around that. I also have access to LinkedIn Learning, and so when it comes to WordPress, I'm just like, log in through the library to LinkedIn Learning. Here's the introduction to WordPress that I recommend you take. It's the most recent one, and you know, I can show you the basics, but other than that, I'll also do for like specific classes that have kind of more niche uses. I'll produce a kind of how-to screen grab video that they can share with their students, partly just because of the staffing issues. We're rebuilding the team, and so a lot of the tech troubleshooting recently has been the Reclaim Help people who know me really well right now. but we're going to get some of that expertise back in-house to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think support is an interesting, kind of Lee teased on it there at the end. Support is an interesting question around these things because there's the kind of the technical support of these systems, like this thing needs to be upgraded or this really weird thing is happening. And then like
updated and everything broke.
Right, Domain of One's Own moves to PHP 8.0 and like people panic.
Yep.
And the support of like how to use this stuff in the classroom, how to use it critically, all those kinds of things. And I'm sure if you have Domain of One's Own at your institution, you kind of wrestled with this. Like you're trying to help people think about it, but also then you feel like you need to maybe know some stuff about it and where that balance is. I think Reclaim does a really great job, and now like they offer options. You can pay them to be that support, which is great. Mary Washington, because of the legacy, between Kartland, who's in the back, he's the director of the DKC over there. We basically kind of split the technical tickets, like if things like weird happen, but the upside of having a DKC, this is the Digital Knowledge Center, this is our student support, right? So we can really, in thinking about like how do you get users in there and comfortable, students get to talk to students about that. Like they have an assignment, they can come into the center and they can get that help and support. Meanwhile, Kartland and I can do that faculty side. Like, how do you think about using those things? So we're extremely fortunate because I could imagine if we had to help all students, it would be overwhelming to do. And we try, like mentioned here, like have documentation and all those things, get class visits, get people started. But yeah, having students do a lot of those repeat questions that you will never really see again and again because you keep getting new students who still, don't know how WordPress works. So how do you continuously think about that onboarding experience and make that better? How do they find the help themselves potentially?
Yeah.
I would just add real quick, we put a TV monitor outside our office. We're in the library. And so we started offering, open office hours, right? Where it's like, come at this time where you can work. And so it's usually a staff person or student worker who can help. And those have been successful too.
One of the biggest challenges, at least at our institution, really has been around setting expectations, particularly for faculty. Yeah. In that they have this research project, they want to make a website, and they're like, great, we have this great program called Domains, and they're like, great, so you're going to do it for me. And you're like, no, that's not how this works.
Partnership.
Yeah, well, but even partnership, given the staffing challenges that we have, because a lot of you may have all experienced this, but sometimes faculty think that the web is magic. Right? And I want this really slick looking website that is like the New York Times with its like ever-flowing scroll and video over text and interactivity. And, you kind of have to reset expectations that like even in-house, we don't even with the people we had who were experienced and left, we couldn't have done that. And so it's trying to manage expectations, manage their own vision of what they want their site to be. This is particularly on the research side, not so much on the teaching side, but that's, the thing about Domain of One's Own is it's supposed to be for any purpose. And so a lot of the times it is for research, digital humanities projects, forward-facing projects, community outreach projects, which are all wonderful. We're currently working on a site for the Pope. Thing about working at a Jesuit institution. Apparently the Pope knows who we are. But again, like it's sort of like I can help them and assist them, but it's like they have external funding to pay a developer because we don't have that kind of expertise in house, and to be able to say that I'm here to empower you to build this site. And I can help your students and I can help you do a teaching site, but like for all of these other bells and whistles, it's just, I don't have, I have 47 other responsibilities in my job. So that's probably the hardest conversation to have with faculty is that setting of expectations in terms of the support we provide and can provide.
I can give you really quickly an example of how we'd like to provide more support. We're learning experience design and also digital scholarship support. So we're trying to wear a lot of different hats. Yeah. And we try to use as many of the tools in the cPanel besides WordPress. So one time we had a project involving Omeka, and I love Omeka, but there's only 2 of us, right? And it just cannot support that. It's just incredible. We tried, we had some external consultants help, and eventually what we did, because it was such a great project and it still lives on, is we did a conversion from Omeka to WordPress. And so we've tried to standardize on WordPress as much as possible. There's still a reputation that, well, it can't scale, it's not strong enough. You can't do this, you can't do that. And I would say, I don't think that's true. But you have to be realistic about, what you can take on as far as resources. And the other thing that I would say is where I struggle with is, sometimes projects, how do you, let's say you had a lot of passion and enthusiasm that went into building a website that's now 5-6 years old, but it doesn't really, nobody asked the question about, well, what's the life cycle of this site? When's it going to go away? And especially if, you've helped out with customizations, or if you've licensed additional, things like a fancy plugin, like a Map Me plugin, great plugin, by the way, but it costs money. And so having that conversation can be tough too. How do you talk to somebody and say, would you like to keep this site? And yes, if so, are you willing to contribute some resources to it? Or, it's sometimes not easy to support over the long haul, especially with upgrades like PHP.
Yeah.
So I'm going to let y'all ask questions at the end too, but we've kind of got some broad strokes of things. Has anything come up that you want to dig deeper into? Or did I ambush you by asking for questions in the middle?
One of the things that I see, I'd love to see those boxes filled in, but I'd also like to see like our boxes added to that and kind of build on a little informational
It'd
chart.
be cool, right? Yeah, profiles for people who use this
So-
stuff.
I know you're old because you call it.
So the funny thing is that there's actually, when I was here at UMW, I created a resource that documented all of this. So there is still a spreadsheet of kind of the history and the writing around domain of one's own for all the early schools. So it goes up till pretty much when I left, which was 5 years ago. And probably even a little before that, because it was kind of that flurry at the very beginning. I'll find it and get the link. It's still up. It's like DTLT. Is it the blog? Is it dtlt.umw.edu? I don't remember. Anyway, there is a kind of spreadsheet that I asked the community to contribute to of kind of that. So a lot from Oklahoma, a lot from UNW, a lot from those early adopters. So there's a bit of a timeline. I'd have to probably fill in some stuff for Georgetown, but again, there is that spreadsheet that has a lot of the early stuff that you can kind of trace and see, like, this is when they piloted it and this is when they did all of these kinds of things. So it's if somebody wants to make that chart out of all of the data I collected, then please do so.
And it's something that's come up before, I think,
Yeah.
a couple times. Like, what would institutional profiles of people who use these services in different ways look like? How would you kind of connect people?
Yeah, I'd want to see even like what it is they started out with,
Yeah.
and what they added,
Yeah.
thing, and did they replace tilde sites, all that kind of stuff.
I'd
Yeah.
say there's two great examples. You mentioned, what was it? Oklahoma State University, right? That's where John Stewart's from, right?
Yep. Yep.
So I'm not the AI John Stewart, I'm the real.
The real,
I think
not John
not the
Stewart.
state part, just
It's
OU.
OU. It's OU.
Yeah.
Sorry.
They
But
get
the other
touchy.
one is Coventry. Check out Coventry domains.
Yeah,
They're in the
Coventry.
UK.
Yeah, yeah.
They've got a really nice presentation that tells you, or interface website that says, do you want domains? Do you need multi-site? Yeah.
Yeah, and they have a really kind of special way.
Very, very, very nicely presented. We stole
Yeah.
a lot from
That
them.
was the other question I've got like tons of questions, and I don't want to dominate, but documentation is that the struggle that it is, and is there a better way to manage documentation? We use the Oklahoma Documentor and still use that.
Yep,
but it's
same
still
here.
kind of like you've got to keep up with it and change screenshots and all that kind of stuff. So.
I've been relying really heavily on getting people started within the Georgetown environment specifically, and then much like Canvas, going in, here is the reclaim hosting documentation, and here are the greatest hits, in the same way we kind of do with Canvas, where it's like, here's what the Georgetown instance looks like, and here are the FAQs directly to Canvas's documentation on it, so we're not reinventing the wheel. And like I said, some just very niche bespoke videos for certain specific audiences. Like they're trying to do this one thing in this class, and they do it every semester. And there's no point in asking Reclaim to document that. So it's like, okay, I'll make a little video for you. Here you go. This is for your class. Reuse it every year.
I think Middlebury also has pretty
Yeah.
good content introduced. Middlebury College, check out their website as well.
Yeah. I think a big question when you're thinking about documentation, and that Lee kind of gets at this too, like sustainability wise, but like what are your end users actually using that for? Like I talked about my students and love them, but sometimes they don't even remember we have documentation, and they're the students that work for us. Like, I'm like,
Yeah.
we have this. So it ends up being useful for us sometimes to, as a link sender, like, here's the thing, I wrote up about it. So like in some ways, I think a lot of people do not function in that way unless and that's where the value of, if there's something hyper-specific that somebody couldn't Google and actually find the answer to, maybe you should have a documentation on that versus, like, I will not recreate how to use WordPress. There's no point in doing that. You point people to those places, I find. They take care of those things, and we'll update their screenshots.
And usually the people who are doing things super niche are doing it on their own, and I don't even see them, right? It's the comp sci people, it's the, people in business who are data crunchers, and they're just like, oh, I can have my own web server. Thank you so much. I'm on my own now. Yeah. And they're doing things that we checked, you can get stats on your Installatron, right? And I look and I'm like, who the hell is installing these things, right? And they've never come to us for more help on it. So I'm like, I guess it's a platform they're familiar with, and they feel pretty good about it. So, awesome for them.
Yeah, that's success right there.
Unique activities, though, like single sign-on, and how every single different university has a different single sign-on.
Exactly.
Special Easter egg that sends the documentation out. So it's like, put those into those documents is what we struggle with.
Well, let me pause you too real quick, because you said some things that I think are interesting. Like when you look at WordPress Multisite, do we still call it that, or do we call it something else?
Yes, it's
WPMS.
When you look at that, and when you look at domain in one zone, what do you look for in terms of success? Because I heard Lee say, like, hey, who's installing these things? That's interesting. Like, do you try and get that score to go up over time? Does it matter? Do you convey it to people? Like, talk to me a little bit about what success looks like in these two different platforms. Ben, you want to lead us off?
Sure. I guess philosophically, from an IT evolutionary perspective, I would say one marker of success is when IT assists people and they can get out of the way, right? And then faculty, student, staff can go about installing their own applications. And when they need help or they're looking for inspiration, they reach out. We always assume no news is good news, right? Usually we hear from them when things break. Nice thing about WordPress Multisite is how many sites are in, your instance of multi-site. Periodically when I create new sites, I'll go back and peek on them and see how they're doing throughout the semester. But these are both, they've been long ago piloted, they're well-established initiatives. And I know because I'm manually creating the community WordPress sites, I keep tabs, keep dibs on, how people are doing.
So real quick though, like you say, no news is good news.
Yes.
Do you look at like help desk tickets over time and look for them to decline versus the number of things, or is this just more like your heart, your gut type of vibe? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And not that either's right, I'm just like trying to think how people systematize this to some degree, or don't.
Yeah.
Sometimes no news is like they've given up.
Yeah, but that's not if people trust you and they come to you and they want to, especially if it's for course related stuff, they're not just gonna, no.
Okay.
Before I'd say, shout out to Kartland for finding the blog post faster and the spreadsheet faster than I could and putting it in the Discord. I very smartly exported all of my blog posts, with Kartland's help, from our, not the original, but our DTLT blog, and put it up on my own domain. Yeah, I know, they're accessible. And it links to the spreadsheet. I wish I could find the infographic that Chris made up too, that kind of showed a bit of a history. But I mean, I don't know what metrics of success are, to be honest. Like, I know it's recording and streaming, but like, we keep getting funded, right? We show that there are use cases. We show that people are using it. We come right up against our ceiling every year of how many cPanels we've bought. You know, I still think it's an underutilized resource, right? We just did a collaboration with the library called the Digital Research Initiative, where the digital librarians and the digital scholarship side collaborated with the digital learning side at Candles, and put out a call for proposals for projects, for digital projects that would also be incorporated into teaching. And the answer to every single one of their problems was domains, right? And half of them knew about it, and the other half were like, oh my gosh, we have hosting service? And we've had this for, you know, since the inception, pretty much. But there's also this question of sustainability, right? This is, at a large place like Georgetown, this is one tool in a gigantic suite of tools. You know, so we have users. There's a desire for it. You know, that this is the stuff that ends up working and used. And as long as people are using it, then they'll keep paying for it, right? And can show a use case. I mean, I guess the advantage is even having the slavery archive on domains will probably mean it lives on for a while, because it's a huge initiative that the university is taking. But yeah, I mean, I don't feel the pressure to grow our numbers, because we do have to balance that with the sustainability of the project. But I mean, you know, the faculty who use it love it, and and you know, the provost doesn't hear about it, and my executive director doesn't hear about it, and so they're pretty happy with that, right? We can give them stats and numbers that show consistent use and maybe a little bit of growth, and yeah, you know.
Yeah, success, I will also say, is hard to define. Like, one thing I didn't mention is that we, like, for both our multi-site and domain of one's own, it's wide open to anybody can just sign up. And so, like, there's not that maybe intermediary where, like, you're having that conversation, so you kind of are vaguely aware what's going on. So I just expect sometimes people will just sign up and never touch it again. So metrics-wise, I can't think about it in that way, because, right, how many services have I ever, like, signed up for that I never went back to that site, right? So, like, because it's open, somebody can stumble across it. They signed up for the wrong thing for their class, whatever.
How many people went to set up domains instead of going to the
right,
blog?
and that is a thing, and like that's also, you know, be glad to talk about that more in detail, but like that the level of openness, right? We come from a history in Mary Washington of wanting to be that open, but it comes with its cost. Literally, people sign up with bad domains, because we also offer top level domains for free, which is. Yeah. So that's it, right. It's there's like 4 other schools that do, like, there's not really that many schools do this anymore. So
do you continue paying the yearly cost of those two?
So then this is where, like, we actually, another problem, we lose lots of interesting student projects, because once the student graduates, we have we remove them from the system. So, like, lots of interesting things have gotten lost because of that, because we can't afford to continue to pay for students who are not here, right? We hope they migrate.
Like in the directory that it started with?
We should talk about that, because I just had like the 3-minute. But one thing I feel like there's underlying, I've almost said it several times, is like the tension between, is this infrastructure or is this an experimental space? That is constantly, because, you know, I encounter many of you, like, some people sit on the IT side of the house, some people sit on the academic side. That's where kind of we are, which I think helps situate our argument often, that this is an academic pursuit, not the institutional, like, you can't expect something to live forever. There's more, that kind of central tension of, like, so what is success when it's an academic experimental space? I think it looks different than if you were your infrastructure and you're worried about uptime and those kinds of how many tickets. Those things matter, right? Because you have to deal with them day to day. But the success is, wow, this student, like, made this really cool thing. Like, let's show it. Like, this student shared something, and that author came and popped it in the comments, something that came up, yesterday. Like, wow, what happens when students are doing, I mean, faculty and staff do, but mainly that's how we focus here. Like, when students get to engage in that, and so it's a lot more qualitative than I think quantitative on that measure.
Well, let me ask you based on that. So if one end of the spectrum is enterprise and the other is like spaceship experimentation, we got two different things going on here, right? The multi-site and domain in one zone. So where do you start to place them in terms of expectations and support in that continuum?
I feel like we are lucky that it is far more on that experimental side, because the university website is actually also based on WordPress. So like when people need that thing to be the infrastructure, like it ends up being a different conversation. And we have way less, I think this gets way more complicated with faculty research and like initiatives where there's like, this is an external facing thing. We tend to be a little bit more internally focused at Mary Washington, which means student work has a different kind of space there versus a faculty member has an expectation that the site that they built, it's now millions of people come to visit or whatever, like that exists and is up. That I know that you spoke a lot about this, like how do you have those conversations? It's tricky.
So at UMW, multi-site and domain one zone stay towards the experimental end.
Yeah.
Now, you just mentioned the slavery archive and some other
Yeah.
stuff. Talk
Yeah.
to me about where it sits there.
So I mean, again, this is where my experience at UMW comes up against the expectations of a place like Georgetown, where it has to work, right? That for me, I do not get to play in the experimental spaces as much as it just has to work. Now, the WordPress multi-site hasn't been an experimental place in a while, basically because it's broken and you can't really do anything with it except type text. So again, that's a conversation we're going to be having as we rebuild the multi-site, is how much leeway, how much freedom, how much room for experimentation and play are we going to build into this new multi-site. When it comes to domains, I would say that the experimentation that's taking place is more around I'm not aware of it, because it is people who do not need my help or help to be able to do it. That they're doing it with their students because they're in computer science, because they're doing their MBA, and this is part of what they're trying to do. They're doing these cool digital projects, largely on their own. But then you do have that expectation that, we have a lot of, and we're still seeing this issue with PHP, that there are a lot of cool, very forward-facing things done on domains because they couldn't do it on the georgetown.edu site. That it needs to work, right? This is their hub. Now, we have a couple of those on the UMW, not on UMW, on the Commons blog. It's a whole other problem I'm going to have to deal with this year. But again, there isn't as much experimentation, I would say. Like there are opportunities with faculty where they're incorporating digital projects. But again, like we get back to that definition, that discussion about what is innovation. Right? Like it's innovative to them, but it's like, yes, we're doing videos and podcasting, and that's really cool. And we have the library. I should have mentioned this too. I'm sorry. The library offers trainings on, much like the DKC does, on a lot of platforms and digital tools that are used. And so we're lucky that we are largely WordPress, and that a lot of other things end up going to the library. But yeah, we're less in the experimental space and more in the infrastructure space, even though I would like to be more in the experimental space.
And is the multi-site more institutional enterprise and the domains a little bit less, or you just see them as basically the same?
I just see them as, I'm so focused on the multi-site not breaking and hanging on for 2 more months that it's just like hard to think of it as anything other than infrastructure right now, because it's like literally spit and duct tape at the moment. And you trying to figure out how to make it work for 2 more months.
I would just say, okay, here's a perfect example. So our WordPress multi-site is definitely infrastructure. Somebody comes to me and says, I really want to build a custom theme. And I really like this, Elementor theme or whatever, different kind of theme, Divi theme, whatever it could be. And I hear you can actually get in there and code and break it and experiment. I'm going to say, absolutely, we're going to put you over on domains. You'll have your own sandbox where you can break things and learn. We do not allow child themes on our production of WordPress Multisite because that would just be a nightmare to try to support. We don't have the resources or knowledge on the fly to figure that out. So definitely domains, experimental. I can spin up, a WordPress instance really quickly, separately on our main domains without having to assign a cPanel. So just for really quick experimental stuff, it works great.
Okay, great.
Huge use. And let me follow up on the elementary stuff when we're done.
Okay.
We do have about 1 minute.
Yeah, we're right at the edge here, and I lied, and you don't have many times for questions, but it's
We're-
also on lunch, so
Yeah.
I mean, this
You
is a
can
great
find
time
us at
to-
lunch. We'll be eating.
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right, but
This hour flew by.
what are we
Yeah.
seeing? No right answers, lots
Yeah.
of different paths.
Yeah.
Likely you'll change and course correct throughout the whole thing. Don't think that you'll have assumed all possibilities going into it, but if you can help guide people to things that make sense as individual conversations, that's a beautiful opportunity. If because of other things you can't, try and think through how you make that more of a procedural process to help. Like I love UMW's apartment house option, and then it leads you to 2 different places. Like there's good ways you can kind of help point people to the right sort of tool with the right sort of overhead, right? And that's part of the conversation. We got 3 examples of lots of different things in very different places, and there are more out there. And what we need is a dating site so that you can find your
Basic-
perfect match to
Yeah.
talk
Basically,
to. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
would say find the institutions that are kind of trying to do similar things to what you're doing and
Yeah.
pick their brains because
Yeah.
that really is influential.
And that's exactly what I did. As soon as I found out that UMW had just redone their multi-site and that we were going to be doing it, I pinged you right away and was like, can we meet and talk about this, please? Because I don't know what I'm doing right now.
Is Discord a place to have these conversations and keep this going?
Yeah,
I'm there, so. if
Yeah, I'm
anybody's
there.
there,
I've got-
so-
yeah.
I mean, that's good to know that you're there.
Yeah.
You know.
All right, we're at time. You cannot speak anymore.
No more
You have to
talking.
leave this room immediately. Thank
have
you
to-
very
you don't
much.
have to
Thank
go
you, our
home. Yeah.
panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you, our lovely audience.
Yeah, but I think actually, just
camera
to follow
crew.
it up, I think that the